guys, in a previous video, I talked to you about the things that I always buy in the drugstore. But now, in this video, I am doing the complete opposite and I'm going to share with you guys the makeup products that I prefer buying high-end. Okay, so when I mean high-end, I'm not talking about luxury brands like Charlotte Tilbury, Dior, Chanel. I'm just talking about those Sephora brands such as Too Faced, Anastasia, Fenty, those ranges are what I consider high-end. I don't really buy luxury makeup because for luxury makeup, I feel like I will never get my money's worth out of those because I'm obviously just paying for the name and I don't really care about the brand names. Now, the first product that I prefer high-end is foundation. I've tried a lot of drugstore foundations. They will either break up on me, they will either break me out, they will either not fit my skin tone and the likes. That's why I now am more into high-end foundations because they have more shade ranges, and also these brands, they allow testers, because here in the Philippines we can't just go out there and ask for a sample. But for these more boutique brands such as NARS, MAC, Makeup Forever, they will allow you to get a little bit of a sample. Especially if you're here in the Philippines, if you go to restaurants, they will allow you to get a little bit of a sample. So that's good because I can really test out how a foundation performs before I buy the full bottle. And for me, for my skin type, which is oily, sensitive, and acne-prone skin, testing out foundation, patch testing it to see if my skin breaks out or not is very important because here in the Philippines, you can't return opened makeup. So I really prefer higher-end makeup just because I feel like the ingredients are better and I get to test them out before I buy the full bottle. And because of that, I don't end up with a lot of foundation bottles that I no longer use because they won't break me out. So for me, I'd rather save up some more to buy just one or two foundation that will definitely work for me, that I've tested out, rather than buy a lot of drugstore brand foundations that are not really perfect or does not really fit my skin. And then the next one is concealers, and I'm talking about spot concealers. For highlighting concealers or those for the under eyes, I'm not really that picky. I can just use drugstore because I'm not really picky on my under eye. I don't have a lot of things to cover, and I feel like there are a lot of drugstore highlighting concealers that are just as good as the high-end. But for spot concealers, I prefer the higher-end ones, specifically the Laura Mercier Secret Camouflage, which is what makeup artists use, and also the NARS Soft Matte Concealer, the one that comes in a pat. And I prefer this because spot concealer, they're essential for me. I have a lot of acne scars and acne, and I need all of my concealers to really match my skin and that it won't budge, and also I need them to be oil-free so that I won't break out. I just haven't found a spot concealer that are just as good as in the drugstore. NYX had a spot concealer before, but NYX I don't think is no longer available here in the Philippines, and also NYX is quite expensive for a drugstore, so I'd rather save up also for some more money to get the real deal, to get the spot concealer that makeup artists use, the one that will work for me, rather than, again, similar to the foundation, rather than end up with a lot of concealers that are just so-so. I no longer buy highlighters, but if I were still buying highlighters, and before, I prefer high-end highlighters. And that's just because they're just finely milled. They just look better on the skin. Even though I've tried a lot of drugstore highlighters. I've tried the Wet n Wild. I even did like swatches of the Wet n Wild. I'll link the video in the description. But yeah, no matter how good the claims of drugstore highlighters, they're just not as good as the high-end ones. Highlighter isn't really essential. Highlighter in itself is an extra added step. It's like a bonus step. So why not increase the feeling of putting on highlighter by using a higher end brand? I'm not sure if I was able to explain that properly, but if I put on highlighter, I feel extra. So why not amp up that feeling of extraness and use a higher end one? But anyway, I haven't bought any highlighters in the past almost 3 years, so perhaps the drugstore has formulated better highlighters compared to my highlighters before. I've tried the Essence, Wet n Wild, ELF, and even Maybelline, but for me, the drugstore highlighters, they're either chunky, they're not finely milled, even though they say it's finely milled, and a lot of YouTubers say that it's finely milled. In person, I can still see some glitters. For the highlighters that I have tried, I definitely prefer my higher end ones than the drugstore. Not that I'm buying any more highlighters because I'm trying to use all of my highlighters up. And then the next one is face powder. I'm talking about setting or loose powder. I've tried a lot of drugstore brands before, like the Coty Airspun, RCMA, Rimmel, L'Oreal. I've tried a lot of drugstore powders, and they just don't really work for me. They will either be too cakey. The Coty Airspun broke me out, and it also smelled so strongly. The Rimmel was too cakey as well, or they won't last on my oily skin. So, and then eventually I realized that I was accumulating so much money and makeup with all of these drugstore powders that are not really performing as much as I want or as well as I want. So I decided to just stop buying drugstore and just buy one high-end powder, which I bought the Laura Mercier, and it solved all of my problem. If I added the money that I used to buy the drugstore products that I've tried before, I spent even more money on those drugstore brands compared to just buying one high-end powder that really performs. So, and then the last one is eyeshadow palette. I have never bought any drugstore eyeshadow palette, and I'm not saying that because I'm a snob. As much as possible, I would have preferred to buy drugstore eyeshadow, but they just don't perform as well. I never bought one, but I've swatched it. I've swatched a lot of drugstore shadows in the store. I've swatched the Maybelline, the Nudes, Wet n Wild, Essence, and they're just not as good as the higher end ones. And eyeshadow palettes, they last such a long time, so I'd rather invest in a little bit more expensive eyeshadow than get a drugstore one. And also keep in mind that a lot of drugstore brands here in the Philippines, they're quite expensive, so I'd rather save a little bit more to get Anastasia, to get Urban Decay, to get Colourpop even, rather than drugstore like Maybelline, Wet n Wild, L'Oreal. They just don't perform well. So there, eyeshadow palettes definitely on the higher end side. The least expensive eyeshadow that I bought was BH Cosmetics, and even that one, it's not my favorite, so I've stopped buying. And then after BH, it was Colourpop. At first, I love Colourpop for love, but I think they kinda degraded. I think because they kept pushing out eyeshadows, the quality is no longer as good as before, so I've stopped buying Colourpop palettes as well. So right now, I'm just really sticking more towards the formulas that I love, which is Anastasia, and I think I will also love Natasha Denona. So yeah, that's gonna end this video. I hope you found this helpful. And before I go, I'd like to thank the people that joined my giveaway. If you didn't win, don't worry, I still have a lot of giveaways planned this year because I still have a lot of makeup that I want to share with you guys, because I've just decluttered my makeup collection and I have a lot of unused makeup. So yeah, just keep in touch and I will see you on my next video.